They billed me $47,000 for my own property. Vivian Thorne, Brookstone Meadows HOA president, marched up to my cabin with a demand for unpaid dues dating back to 1999, apparently forgetting to check when my family actually acquired this land. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, waving legal documents in my face,
"Your little cabin has been freeloading off our community since we started. Pay what you owe or we'll foreclose within 30 days.
I stood on my grandfather's porch, listening to this clipboard tyrant threaten land that's been in my family since the 1920s. The wooden boards creaked under our feet as she waited for me to panic. Instead, I smiled. "See, I'm Owen Caldwell, retired land surveyor, and I collect vintage property deeds for fun."
Vivian, want to see the 1887 document that predates your entire board by over a century?
Her confident smirk cracked like old paint. "What would you do if your HOA billed you for fees older than their existence? Share your HOA horror stories below. Let me tell you about my quiet little life before Vivian Thorne decided to make it her personal crusade. I'm Owen Caldwell, 52, living in my grandfather's 1920s hunting cabin on 2.5 wooded acres outside Millbrook Falls, Oregon. Every morning starts the same way. Coffee brewing on the wood stove, that rich cedar smoke curling up through Douglas fir beams, while my golden retriever Ranger stretches across porch boards that creak like old bones. The cabin's nothing fancy. Solid logs, stone fireplace, floors that groan in all the familiar spots. I've spent 3 years of retirement restoring vintage surveying equipment and maintaining the property exactly how 3 generations of Caldwells intended. The creek babbling along our eastern border sounds like nature's own white noise machine. Then 1999 happened. Some developer bought the adjacent farmland and slapped up Brookstone Meadows, 200 cookie-cutter houses painted in exactly 3 approved shades of beige. Close enough to hear their Saturday morning leaf blower symphony, far enough that I figured we'd coexist peacefully. Enter Vivian Thorne, professional neighborhood tyrant. Picture this. 58 years old, former real estate agent turned HOA president for 3 consecutive terms. She drives a white BMW with vanity plates reading, "Horeen," I swear on my grandfather's grave, and carries a clipboard like it's nuclear launch codes. This woman measures grass height with actual rulers. I've watched her patrol the development with measuring tape, issuing fines for mailboxes painted the wrong shade of forest green. She once forced the Henderson family to repaint their entire house because their beige was too warm-toned for community aesthetic standards. But here's where it gets personal. Every time a delivery truck visits my place, FedEx, propane service, grocery delivery, Vivian materializes like a bad rash. She interrogates drivers, demands delivery confirmations, claims they're disrupting our peaceful residential character. Funny how the same drivers serve her neighbors without any harassment. The message was crystal clear. My cabin was an eyesore lowering property values, and Vivian wanted it gone. Her first real attack came last March. Anonymous complaint to county code enforcement claiming my unsightly structure violated residential zoning. The smell of bureaucratic paperwork and stale coffee in that courthouse conference room still makes my stomach turn. $3,200 in lawyer fees later, I'd proven what I already knew. Grandfathered rural exemption, completely legal. Vivian's response? "We'll find another way to clean up this neighborhood." Then the harassment escalated. My chainsaw became excessively loud when I cut firewood at 2 p.m. Parking enforcement started targeting my guests on public roads. She spread rumors at HOA meetings about property values suffering due to substandard neighboring structures. The worst part? Her subtle discrimination tactics. When elderly Mrs. Washington from the development brought me homemade cookies, Vivian questioned whether I could afford proper reciprocal hospitality. When my surveyor buddy Tommy visited, she assumed he was some kind of contractor working without permits. One evening, walking my property line, I caught the scent of someone's cigarette smoke drifting through the pine trees. Vivian, lurking at the boundary, photographing my violations with her phone. The woman had turned property line surveillance into a part-time job. Here's what made the whole situation ironic. I'm a retired land surveyor who collects vintage property records, not stamps or coins, actual historical deeds, railroad grants, timber contracts. Most people would call it boring. I call it fascinating detective work, piecing together how boundaries evolved over decades. My filing cabinet contained boxes of documents spanning back to Oregon's territorial days. maps showing original survey markers, federal land grants, environmental designations. I'd spent countless evenings organizing this collection, never imagining it would become my secret weapon. That certified letter demanding $47,000 wasn't random harassment. It was Vivian's declaration of war. She'd moved beyond petty complaints into full-scale legal assault, betting that an isolated retiree wouldn't have the resources to fight back. What she didn't realize was that she'd just picked a fight with someone whose hobby was proving exactly when, how, and why people owned specific pieces of land. The taste of victory was already forming in my mouth, bitter and sweet like strong coffee. 3 weeks after that courthouse victory, Vivian came back swinging harder than a drunk lumberjack with a grudge. She'd hired Pemberton and Associates, one of those law firms that advertises on bus benches and charges you $300 just to breathe near their receptionist. The ambush came via process server on a Tuesday morning while I was feeding Ranger his breakfast kibble. This guy in a wrinkled suit handed me an envelope thick enough to stop a bullet and vanished before I could ask questions. Inside was pure legal terrorism, a formal demand for $47,000 covering 25 years of unpaid HOA fees, special assessments, and accumulated penalties. The letter claimed Pemberton and Associates had discovered historical documentation proving inclusion of the Caldwell property within original Brookstone Meadows boundaries. Their language was designed to scare the hell out of anyone who'd never dealt with property law before. Threats of liens, foreclosure proceedings, the whole intimidation playbook. My first thought? This woman's either completely delusional or she's betting I'm too poor to fight back. Time for some detective work. I drove straight to the county courthouse, that familiar smell of old paper and industrial-strength floor cleaner hitting me like a time machine back to my surveying days. During 30 years in the field, I'd learned that public records don't lie, but people interpreting them sure as hell do. Dolores Henning, the county clerk who'd been filing paperwork since the Carter administration, wheeled out 3 banker's boxes of Brookstone Meadows development documents. "Honey," she said, adjusting glasses thick enough to spot satellites, "that HOA caused more trouble than a raccoon in a garbage truck." I spread documents across the metal research table under buzzing fluorescent lights that made everything look like a crime scene, photographing each page while Dolores shared courthouse gossip about developers who thought they could rewrite property law to suit their profit margins. That's when I found the smoking gun, buried in the 1999 environmental impact study like a landmine waiting for the right footstep. The original HOA filing contained language about including all contiguous residential properties within 500 feet. But there was also a separate requirement for buffer zone preservation around existing structures to maintain wetland access corridors. My cabin was specifically excluded to protect the creek system running along my eastern boundary. But here's where it got interesting. Dolores mentioned the original developer had wanted to include my property for aesthetic consistency, but something had stopped them cold. She disappeared into the basement archives and returned with a dusty file that made my surveyor's heart sing. Inside was a 1999 letter from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality specifically prohibiting any HOA authority over my land due to federal wetland protection. That pretty little creek babbling through my property wasn't just scenic, it was legally protected habitat under the Clean Water Act. The mini twist hit me like lightning. Vivian wasn't just wrong about my property boundaries. She was about to violate federal environmental law. I drove home with windows down, breathing Douglas fir and satisfaction in equal measure. Ranger greeted me with his usual enthusiasm while I processed the beautiful irony. This woman who measured grass heights was about to step on a federal landmine. That evening, I called Vivian directly. "Interesting legal theory," I told her. "Mind explaining how your HOA plans to claim authority over federally protected wetlands?" Long pause. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your property has always been subject to our standards." "Really?" "Because I'm holding a DEQ letter that says otherwise." Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear her clipboard quivering. "Mr. Caldwell, you can try to confuse the issue all you want, but our attorneys have done their research. Pay what you owe or face consequences." The line went dead with a click that sounded like breaking kindling. From my surveying years, I remembered a simple truth that saved me thousands in legal fees. When someone threatens property action, verify their claims independently. County records are public. Anyone can request documents showing boundaries, authority limits, and environmental restrictions. Never trust an HOA's interpretation of what they can legally do to your land. That night, I spread Pemberton's threatening letter beside the environmental exclusion documents on my kitchen table. The contrast was beautiful. Their intimidating language versus hard proof they'd never researched basic facts about the property they were trying to steal. The taste of bourbon mixed with satisfaction as I realized what Vivian had actually accomplished. She thought she'd escalated to nuclear warfare. Instead, she'd handed me evidence of legal malpractice. Her attorneys had filed claims without proper title research, violating their professional obligations. Rangers snored peacefully by the fireplace while I planned my counterattack. This woman had just committed the tactical equivalent of attacking a fortress without checking if it was occupied by federal marshals. Tomorrow would bring phase 2 of her education in property law. The kind of education that ends careers and makes people very, very sorry they picked the wrong neighbor to bully. Vivian's next move proved she'd graduated from petty harassment to full-scale psychological warfare. 2 days after our phone call, she organized an emergency HOA meeting with an agenda that didn't mention my name but might as well have had my photos stapled to every mailbox. The smell of burnt coffee and nervous sweat filled Brookstone Meadows Community Center as neighbors packed in like sardines for Vivian's theatrical performance. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation that would shame a Fortune 500 marketing team. Photos of my unsightly cabin, taken with telephoto lenses, charts showing road maintenance costs, even a dramatic slide titled 25 Years of Freeloading, the Hidden Cost to Our Community. Fellow residents, she announced, clicking through images of my vintage surveying equipment. We have a parasitic situation threatening our collective investment. One individual has been benefiting from community improvements without contributing a single penny for 2.5 decades. The performance was masterful. Treasurer Janet Morse nodded like a dashboard bobblehead while Architectural Committee Chair Bradford Kemp stood to share his grave concerns about non-conforming structures destroying our neighborhood's prestigious reputation. But here's where Vivian made her fatal mistake. She distributed copies of Pemberton and Associates' demand letter to prove her legal authority was rock solid. I wasn't at this circus. Learned about it from Mrs. Washington, who attended out of morbid curiosity and called me immediately afterward. Her voice trembled over the crackling landline. "Oh, and honey, that woman painted you like some deadbeat criminal. But something felt wrong about her whole presentation." While Vivian was busy turning neighbors into a pitchfork mob, I'd been doing what 30 years of surveying taught me, following paper trails until they lead somewhere interesting. In my home office, surrounded by the musty perfume of aged documents and rain drumming against windows like impatient fingers, I'd been excavating my deed collection. Not just the 1887 railroad grant, but every property transfer, survey map, and timber contract spanning 5 generations of Caldwell ownership. That's when I found the document that made me actually laugh out loud. Buried in a manila folder with my grandfather's old hunting licenses was a 1999 insurance survey, the one Brookstone Meadows Insurance Company had required before issuing coverage. That survey explicitly excluded my property from any HOA jurisdiction to establish precise liability boundaries. The mini twist that nearly made me spill bourbon. Someone with Vivian's exact signature had acknowledged this exclusion at the county courthouse. Either this woman had convenient amnesia, or she was betting I'd never dig up the paperwork proving her own HOA had legally disclaimed authority over my land. I called Tommy Brewster, my insurance contact who'd helped navigate coverage when I inherited the cabin. His voice carried the weight of professional experience. "Owen, any HOA attempting to include specifically excluded property commits insurance fraud. Companies investigate boundary violations like federal marshals, and they press criminal charges." From handling property disputes during my surveying career, I understood that insurance exclusions aren't suggestions. They're legal concrete. Companies require surgical precision in boundary documentation to limit liability exposure. Vivian wasn't just picking fights anymore. She was potentially defrauding her own insurance carrier while violating federal environmental protection laws. That evening brought certified mail delivery number 2, an escalated threat promising lien placement within 15 days and immediate foreclosure proceedings for willful non-compliance. The cheap paper crinkled in my hands as I read her increasingly desperate language, but instead of intimidation, I felt something unexpected, genuine pity. This clipboard dictator was excavating a legal grave so deep she'd need mining equipment to escape. I settled on the porch with Ranger and 3 fingers of bourbon, listening to that federally protected creek babble along our boundary, the same wetland system that made Vivian's entire campaign illegal under Clean Water Act provisions. The same habitat designation that had been protecting this land since before she learned to spell homeowners association. The evening air carried the scent of Douglas fir and impending justice as I processed the beautiful symmetry. Vivian thought she was systematically destroying my peaceful retirement. Instead, she was methodically documenting her own legal violations for future prosecutors. Tomorrow would bring phase 3 of building the case that would expose her campaign as systematic fraud. Not simple ignorance or overzealous enforcement. Actual criminal fraud involving insurance companies, environmental violations, and falsified property authority claims. The taste of aged whiskey mixed with anticipation as I realized this woman had just provided enough evidence to end her HOA dictatorship permanently. She believed she was escalating our conflict toward inevitable victory. She was actually choreographing her own professional destruction in real time, complete with documentation that would make prosecutors smile in their sleep. Vivian's desperation hit nuclear levels when legal threats failed to break me, so she decided to destroy my reputation instead. Her first strike came through Bradford Kemp, who filed an anonymous code complaint claiming I was running an illegal business from my cabin. The accusation, vintage surveying equipment restoration, constituted commercial activity violating residential zoning. The timing was surgical, Wednesday morning inspection while I'd normally be grocery shopping in town. This woman had studied my routine like a predator tracking prey. But small-town networks run deeper than HOA politics. Dave Sullivan, the code enforcement officer, had worked boundary disputes with me during my surveying years. When his truck crunched up my gravel driveway, I was waiting with coffee and documentation. Owen, Dave said 20 minutes later, your property's cleaner than most suburban garages. Clearly personal hobby equipment, zero commercial indicators. Whoever filed this complaint just wasted taxpayer money. Strike 1 against Vivian's credibility. That afternoon, she escalated to social media warfare. Concerned Brookstone neighbors appeared on Facebook featuring telephoto photos of my industrial eyesores and captions about threats to our family-friendly environment. The comment section became a digital lynch mob with residents sharing concerns about property values and inappropriate machinery. Bradford contributed expert commentary about aesthetic standards, while neighbors who'd never spoken to me personally demanded enforcement action. But Vivian made a crucial tactical error. She was creating documented evidence of harassment. While she built her online hate campaign, I'd been recording every boundary violation, every threatening call, every instance of her trespassing to photograph violations. Oregon's single-party consent law made these recordings perfectly legal, and I had hours of material proving systematic harassment. The mini twist that changed everything came through Mrs. Washington's evening phone call. Her voice trembled with anger. Owen, honey, 3 more residents got inspection notices right after supporting you at the meeting. She's retaliating against anyone who questions her authority. Fear was spreading through Brookstone Meadows like wildfire. Vivian wasn't just targeting me anymore, she was punishing anyone who refused to join her crusade. That night brought a revelation that explained her desperate escalation. While organizing my documentation, I discovered Vivian had applied for County Planning Commission last month. Her application showcased proven community leadership and enforcement of municipal compliance standards. She was using my persecution as a political resume builder. Every harassment campaign, every legal threat, every code violation was being documented as evidence of her proactive leadership. My peaceful retirement had become a prop in her ambition theater. But the real bombshell came from Tommy Brewster's insurance investigation. Owen, he said during our evening phone call, their insurance company is investigating irregular boundary claims. They've discovered multiple attempts to include excluded properties. This isn't administrative error, it's systematic fraud. From handling insurance disputes as a surveyor, I knew companies investigate fraud like federal marshals. They employ former FBI agents and prosecute violations aggressively. Vivian hadn't just picked a legal fight. She'd declared war on people with unlimited resources and zero tolerance for deception. Then came the visitor that proved Vivian's foundation was crumbling. Janet Morse arrived after dark, headlights sweeping across my porch like guilty searchlights. The smell of her nervous cigarette smoke mixed with pine-scented evening air as Brookstone Meadows' own treasurer sat at my kitchen table, hands shaking around her coffee mug. "Owen," she whispered, Vivian forced this legal action without telling the board about environmental issues or insurance problems. Most of us had no idea we were violating federal law. The HOA treasurer was secretly meeting with their supposed enemy because she'd discovered her president was lying to the board about fundamental legal facts. Your creek system, it's federally protected, isn't it? Janet continued. Any HOA authority over protected wetlands violates the Clean Water Act, criminal violations. She'd done independent research and realized Vivian was dragging the entire community toward federal prosecution. We never voted to commit environmental crimes, Janet said, stubbing out her cigarette with trembling fingers. If this goes to court, every board member could face personal liability. As her taillights disappeared into Douglas fir darkness, I processed the beautiful irony. Vivian's own board members were investigating her claims and discovering the truth she'd been hiding. Tomorrow would bring federal attention to our property dispute, the kind that ends political careers and starts criminal investigations. The taste of victory was already forming, bitter and satisfying like strong coffee mixed with righteous anger. The phone call that destroyed Vivian's world came on a Thursday morning while I was drinking coffee and watching her measure mailbox heights across the road. Mr. Caldwell, Dr. Elena Vasquez's voice carried the weight of historical authority through my crackling landline. I found something that's going to end this dispute permanently. 2 weeks earlier, I'd contacted Oregon State Archives requesting federal documentation about my 1887 railroad grant. Dr. Vasquez had been hunting through congressional survey records, environmental assessments, and territorial land designations. Your property isn't just historically protected, she said. It's federally untouchable. The smell of pine smoke from my wood stove mixed with anticipation as she explained her discovery. The 1999 Environmental Impact Study includes detailed exclusion mapping specifically designating your land as conservation easement, forever wild status. Federal wetland protection under the Clean Water Act. Any HOA claiming authority over protected wetlands commits federal crimes. I walked to my kitchen window watching Vivian across the street with her tape measure and clipboard, completely oblivious that she was standing in the shadow of federal prosecution. How serious? I asked, though my surveying background already painted the picture. $25,000 per day in EPA fines minimum, criminal prosecution for knowing violations. The original Brookstone Meadows developer specifically acknowledged this restriction. Anyone claiming authority over your property would be willfully violating environmental law. The power dynamic had just flipped like a coin landing on its head. For months, I'd been defending my property rights against Vivian's legal harassment. Now I held evidence that her entire campaign wasn't just wrong. It was criminally illegal under federal environmental protection statutes. But the revelation cut deeper than wetland violations. There's more, Dr. Vasquez continued. EPA Regional Director Sandra Martinez has been investigating HOA overreach involving protected properties. Your case fits a pattern they've been tracking across 3 states. Federal attention, the kind that transforms local bullies into criminal defendants facing prison time. Mr. Caldwell, if your HOA board voted to claim authority over designated wetlands, every voting member committed federal environmental crimes. Personal, criminal liability, not just civil violations. I hung up and processed the beautiful irony while watching Vivian continue her mailbox measurements. This woman who'd spent months threatening to destroy my peaceful retirement had actually been documenting her own federal law violations in exquisite detail. Every demand letter, every legal threat, every board meeting claiming HOA authority over my property was evidence of systematic environmental crime. Pemberton and Associates had filed court documents asserting jurisdiction over federally protected wetlands, professional malpractice that could end their legal careers. The personal stakes were devastating. Vivian's desperate political ambitions had dragged 200 innocent families into criminal environmental law violations. Her resume-building campaign had transformed the entire HOA board into potential federal defendants. Janet Morse's late-night visit suddenly made perfect sense. The board treasurer had realized they'd voted to commit crimes without understanding the legal implications. But here's what made this revelation beautiful. I could end Vivian's harassment with one phone call to Sandra Martinez. Federal environmental enforcement supersedes local governance disputes every single time. Instead, I decided to let her finish hanging herself with her own legal rope. She'd spent months systematically documenting federal law violations while believing she was building an unstoppable case against a helpless retiree. Every threatening phone call, every harassment incident, every claim of authority over protected property was evidence for future federal prosecutors. The taste of morning coffee mixed with justice as I watched Vivian march back to her BMW, completely unaware that federal marshals were already investigating patterns of HOA environmental crimes. Tomorrow would bring her final desperate escalation, the kind that transforms ambitious local politicians into criminal defendants facing years in federal prison. I refilled my coffee and settled onto the porch, listening to that federally protected creek bubble its way toward Vivian's legal destruction. Friday morning found me transforming my quiet cabin into a war room that would make Pentagon strategists jealous. The dining room table disappeared under a battlefield of documents, 1887 railroad grants, environmental studies, insurance exclusions, and HOA meeting minutes spread across oak planks like evidence in a murder trial. The aroma of strong coffee mixed with aged parchment as I photographed each piece of Vivian's self-destruction. But this wasn't just about organizing paperwork. This was about building a legal trap that would snap shut on anyone stupid enough to threaten my family's land. I started with the nuclear option, Dr. Vasquez's federal environmental documentation. Every photograph included GPS metadata timestamps, creating an unbreakable chain of custody that would make evidence tampering impossible. From my surveying years, I'd learned that federal courts demand precision. Sloppy documentation destroys even perfect cases. The timeline I created was brutally simple. 1887 railroad grant, 1920s cabin construction, 1999 environmental protection designation, 2024 criminal harassment campaign. No legal jargon, no complex terminology, just chronological proof that Vivian was attempting to steal land that had been legally protected longer than her entire bloodline had existed in Oregon. Then came the physical trap preparation, and this is where things got interesting. I installed motion-activated trail cameras at 6 strategic boundary positions, the same equipment deer hunters use, except I was tracking a different kind of predator. Each camera captured high-definition video with night vision, GPS coordinates, and automatic cloud backup. The beautiful irony? Every time Vivian trespassed to photograph my violations, she'd be creating video evidence of her own criminal behavior while violating federal environmental protection boundaries. But technology was just the appetizer. The main course required building an army of unexpected allies. Rivers and Ridges Wetland Conservation took my call on the second ring. Their legal director, Patricia Tatum, practically purred when I explained HOA overreach involving protected habitats. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "this case could establish precedent protecting rural properties against suburban encroachment. We're bringing our entire legal team." Environmental groups don't mess around. They fight with federal resources, unlimited budgets, and the righteous fury of people who've dedicated their lives to protecting habitats from developers. I also contacted Oregon Historical Society about my railroad documentation collection. Turns out, complete 1887 territorial records are academically precious. Dr. Robert Martinez, their research director, agreed to authenticate my documents and provide expert testimony. Nothing destroys fraudulent legal claims like having university historians confirm your property's legitimate heritage. The media angle came through investigative reporter Samantha Tatum, Patricia's sister and a journalist who specialized in HOA abuse stories. When I explained federal environmental crimes and insurance fraud, her response was immediate. This isn't just local news anymore. Federal crimes involving environmental protection make national headlines. Now for the technical strategy that would destroy Vivian's entire operation. Environmental law operates on kindergarten simple principles. Federal protection supersedes local authority, period. HO, as claiming jurisdiction over protected wetlands, commit crimes equivalent to private citizens, declaring authority over national parks. The penalties are designed to terrify: $25,000 per day in EPA fines, criminal prosecution, personal liability for board members who vote for violations. Legal malpractice added delicious complications. Pemberton and Associates had filed court documents without researching basic environmental restrictions. Professional negligence that could destroy their practice. State bar associations investigate attorneys who claim authority over federal property without performing due diligence. But the insurance fraud angle was pure criminal dynamite. Vivian had signed exclusion documents acknowledging my property's protected status, then later filed legal claims asserting HOA authority over the same land. knowingly misrepresenting boundaries to insurance companies triggers criminal fraud investigations with federal prosecution potential. The financial destruction would be comprehensive and permanent. EPA violations carry personal liability. Board members face individual prosecution even if the HOA declares bankruptcy. Legal defense costs for federal environmental crimes start at 6 figures per defendant. Insurance policy cancellation would leave 200 families without coverage while facing personal liability for their board's criminal decisions. The psychological warfare was equally calculated. Vivian's entire strategy depended on intimidating, isolated victims who couldn't afford extended legal battles. She'd perfected the art of bureaucratic bullying, overwhelming people with paperwork, deadlines, and threats until they surrendered rather than fight. I planned to let her commit completely to her public position before revealing the federal evidence. Maximum humiliation, maximum legal exposure, maximum deterrent effect for future bullies targeting vulnerable property owners. Through careful community conversations, I'd been undermining her authority without revealing my weapons. Mrs. Washington mentioned concerns about legal costs. Bradford Kemp's wife questioned whether this harassment was really necessary. Even Janet Morse was privately investigating environmental implications. By Monday, Vivian would make her final desperate moves, probably involving sabotage, bribery, or retaliation against anyone questioning her leadership. I was ready to spring the trap that would end her career permanently. Monday morning brought Vivian's most desperate sabotage attempt yet, and the moment I knew she'd completely lost her mind. Bradford Kemp filed another anonymous complaint claiming I was operating a hazardous waste facility due to my vintage surveying equipment restoration. The accusation was so absurd it bordered on comedy. Apparently, cleaning brass instruments with mineral spirits constituted environmental contamination threatening groundwater safety. The timing revealed her surveillance obsession. The complaint was filed for Tuesday inspection during my usual hardware store run. This woman had been studying my schedule with the dedication of a CIA operative planning an assassination. But Vivian had made a crucial tactical error. She'd escalated to involving county environmental health, which meant actual scientists would be investigating her claims. Environmental Health Inspector Maria Santos arrived Tuesday morning while I was waiting on my porch with documentation and coffee. The smell of diesel exhaust from her county truck mixed with morning pine scent as she explained the hazardous materials complaint. 20 minutes later, Maria was laughing at the absurdity. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, photographing my meticulously organized restoration workspace. "Whoever filed this complaint has never seen actual environmental contamination. Your setup is cleaner than most commercial workshops." But Maria's visit revealed something more interesting. This is the third frivolous environmental complaint filed against the same address in 2 months. Our department's starting an investigation into malicious reporting. Strike 3 against Vivian's credibility with county officials. That afternoon brought her social media escalation to full-scale character assassination. Concerned Brookstone neighbors exploded with new posts featuring aerial drone footage of my property. Apparently, Bradford had invested in surveillance technology. The captions painted my cabin as an environmental hazard and industrial blight destroying family neighborhoods. Comments became increasingly vicious. Residents who'd never spoken to me demanded immediate enforcement action and questioned why authorities weren't protecting children from toxic exposure. But social media warfare requires careful documentation, and I'd been screenshotting every post, every comment, every malicious accusation. Oregon's cyberbullying laws cover systematic online harassment campaigns, and Vivian was creating perfect evidence of organized defamation. The mini twist that changed everything came through my trail camera footage. Wednesday night, motion sensors triggered cameras along my eastern boundary. The footage was beautiful. Vivian and Bradford trespassing onto my property at 11 p.m., using flashlights to photograph my equipment storage shed from inside my fence line. High-definition video captured them discussing evidence gathering and documenting violations while standing on federally protected wetland property. They'd committed criminal trespassing while violating environmental protection laws, all recorded in crystal-clear detail. But Thursday brought the revelation that proved Vivian had completely abandoned any pretense of legal authority. Janet Morse called requesting an emergency meeting, her voice trembling with barely controlled panic. We met at the coffee shop in town, the smell of espresso and fear mixing as she explained the HOA board's secret discovery. "Owen," she whispered, Vivian hired a private investigator to research your background. She's looking for anything: financial problems, legal issues, personal scandals, anything she can use to destroy your credibility. The HOA president was now paying private investigators to conduct opposition research against a retiree who'd never threatened anyone except her ego. That's not the worst part, Janet continued. She approached 3 board members about special assessments to fund extended legal action. She wants to levy every homeowner an extra $1,000 to keep fighting you. Vivian was planning to tax her entire community to fund her personal vendetta against my family's land. But Janet's final revelation was the smoking gun that proved criminal intent. She offered me a $5,000 consulting bonus to vote for the assessment. When I refused, she threatened to have me removed from the board for failure to support community interests. Bribery. Attempted corruption of elected officials. Vivian had crossed from harassment into felony territory. That evening, my phone rang with news that made the whole situation even more surreal. "Mr. Caldwell," said a professional voice, "this is Regional Director Sandra Martinez from the EPA's Environmental Crimes Division. We've received multiple reports about potential Clean Water Act violations in your area. Would you be available for an interview regarding HOA overreach involving protected wetlands? The federal government was calling me." Sandra explained that EPA had been tracking patterns of HOA environmental crimes across 3 states, cases where neighborhood associations claimed authority over protected habitats, usually targeting elderly or isolated property owners who couldn't afford extended legal battles. "Your situation fits a documented pattern," she said. "We're particularly interested in any systematic harassment involving federally protected property." I hung up and processed the beautiful justice of it all. Vivian's desperate escalation had attracted federal attention to exactly the kind of environmental crimes she'd been committing for months. Tomorrow would bring her final gambit, probably involving media manipulation, fraudulent legal claims, or outright sabotage of my property. But now she wasn't just fighting a retired surveyor with a collection of old deeds. She was fighting the federal government. Friday brought Vivian's final gambit, and the moment she sealed her own criminal fate with federal authorities watching. The morning started with Pemberton and Associates filing a quiet title action, claiming the HOA had discovered adverse possession rights over my property due to community maintenance of adjacent areas. Legal gibberish designed to sound intimidating while being completely meaningless. But the real bombshell came with their attached notice of intent to foreclose, posted directly on my front door like I was some deadbeat abandoning a crack house. This woman had just filed fraudulent court documents claiming ownership of federally protected wetland property. The absurdity would have been hilarious if it weren't so criminally stupid. Adverse possession requires 10 continuous years of open, hostile use. Vivian's HOA had never used my property, maintained it, or even acknowledged its existence until March 2024. Their own meeting minutes proved first contact was recent, but her media manipulation reached peak desperation that afternoon. Channel 7 News arrived for Vivian's scheduled interview about community action against property tax deadbeats. She'd somehow convinced them this was a story about civic responsibility rather than criminal harassment of protected federal property. I watched from my kitchen window as she performed for cameras wearing her power suit and gesturing toward my cabin like a prosecutor presenting evidence of mass murder. "This individual has been freeloading off community improvements for 25 years, she announced to the news crew. "While hardworking families pay their fair share, some people think they're above contributing to neighborhood maintenance." The irony was beautiful. Vivian was creating broadcast evidence of her criminal claims over federal property while EPA investigators were already building a case against her. But her performance included a lie so outrageous it crossed into defamation territory. Mr. Caldwell operates an unlicensed business from his property while refusing to pay fees that fund road maintenance, landscaping, and community safety services. Complete fabrication. My property had never benefited from HOA services, used HOA amenities, or been subject to HOA authority. She was literally making up services to justify fraudulent fees. The mini twist came when reporter Amanda Lopez asked for my response to the allegations. I'd be happy to provide documentation proving Mr. Caldwell's property was specifically excluded from HOA authority due to federal environmental protection, I told her through my screen door. I have 1887 deeds, 1999 environmental studies, and EPA correspondence confirming this land's protected status. Amanda's journalistic instincts activated immediately. Federal protection? What kind of environmental issues? Wetland habitat protection under the Clean Water Act. Any HOA claiming authority over protected federal property commits environmental crimes. I watched Vivian's confident expression crack like ice under spring sunshine. That evening brought the insurance investigation that proved her fraud was systematic rather than accidental. Tommy Brewster called with devastating news for everyone in Brookstone Meadows. Owen, their insurance company is canceling coverage effective immediately. Multiple fraudulent boundary claims, systematic misrepresentation of excluded properties, and potential criminal violations of environmental law. 200 families were losing homeowners insurance because their HOA president had been lying to insurance companies about property boundaries for months. It gets worse, Tommy continued. The company's reporting this to state insurance fraud investigators. Knowingly, including excluded properties, constitutes criminal deception. Vivian wasn't just facing EPA charges anymore. She was looking at insurance fraud prosecution with potential prison time. But her final desperate move proved she'd completely abandoned rational decision-making. Saturday morning, I discovered fresh orange spray paint marking property boundaries along my fence line. Someone had trespassed overnight to mark what they considered HOA territory, using federal property as their canvas. My trail cameras captured everything. Vivian and Bradford, wearing dark clothing, spray painting my fence posts at 2 a.m. while discussing establishing clear community boundaries. Criminal vandalism of federal property, captured in high-definition video with audio recording their criminal intent. The EPA investigation accelerated dramatically when I forwarded the video to Regional Director Martinez. Her response was immediate. Mr. Caldwell, we're treating this as an active environmental crime investigation. Please document any further harassment or property damage. Federal law enforcement was now investigating Vivian's campaign as systematic environmental crime rather than civil property dispute. Sunday brought the community uprising that proved even her supporters were abandoning ship. Janet Morse organized a secret meeting with reasonable board members to discuss emergency leadership changes. Word spread through Brookstone Meadows like wildfire. Residents realized their HOA was facing federal prosecution while losing insurance coverage due to their president's criminal behavior. The petition demanding Vivian's immediate resignation collected 47 signatures in 6 hours. Monday would bring the final confrontation, Vivian's planned emergency board meeting to authorize maximum legal action against my property. She'd invited media coverage to document community solidarity against freeloaders. Instead, she'd be walking into federal custody while her own community demanded her resignation. The taste of victory was already forming, sharp and satisfying like coffee mixed with perfect timing. Monday evening's HOA meeting packed the Brookstone Meadows Community Center like a courthouse during a murder trial. Except tonight, the killer was about to convict herself on live television. Vivian arrived in her freshly detailed BMW wearing what she probably thought was her victory suit. Navy blue with gold buttons that caught the harsh fluorescent lighting as she strutted toward the building carrying a leather briefcase like she was presenting closing arguments to the Supreme Court. Channel 7 News had set up their cameras near the front, reporter Amanda Lopez checking lighting while her cameraman adjusted angles for optimal drama. The smell of burnt coffee and nervous sweat filled the air as nearly 200 residents crowded into a space designed for maybe 50 people. I entered carrying my weathered surveyor's case filled with a century's worth of legal ammunition, nodding to Dr. Elena Vasquez from Oregon State Archives, who'd driven down with official credentials and federal documentation. In the back row, EPA Regional Director Sandra Martinez sat quietly with a tablet computer, looking like a federal prosecutor observing evidence gathering. Vivian opened with theatrical flair that would shame community theater. Fellow residents, she announced, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation titled Protecting Our Community Investment, tonight we take decisive action against 25 years of property tax freeloading. Her slides featured dramatic financial projections, $52,847 in unpaid fees plus accumulated interest, charts showing community services subsidized by responsible homeowners, and photos of my cabin labeled as non-conforming structures threatening property values. The performance climaxed with her formal demand. This individual has exploited our goodwill long enough. I move to authorize immediate foreclosure proceedings to recover community funds and eliminate this eyesore permanently. Bradford Kemp seconded the motion with rehearsed enthusiasm. 3 board members nodded like dashboard bobbleheads while Janet Morse stared at her hands, visibly uncomfortable with participating in documented federal crimes. Then Amanda Lopez asked the question that triggered my trap. Mrs. Thorne, what's your response to allegations that this property is protected under federal environmental law? Vivian's confident smirk widened like she'd been waiting for this moment. Completely false. Our legal team has thoroughly researched property boundaries. This land falls clearly within established HOA jurisdiction. Perfect. She'd just committed perjury on live television while doubling down on her criminal claims. I stood up, walked to the projection screen, and placed my 1887 railroad deed on the document camera. The room fell silent as residents read the original surveyor's language. Hereby granted in perpetuity with full riparian and mineral rights, exempt from all future municipal assessments and private governance. This property, I said calmly, was granted federal protection 112 years before your HOA existed. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward with archive credentials and federal documentation. The 1999 Environmental Impact Study designated this land as conservation easement, forever wild status. Any private authority over protected wetlands violates the Clean Water Act. Vivian's face drained of color like someone had opened a valve, but the knockout punch came when Tommy Brewster read from the insurance exclusion form that bore Vivian's own signature. Property specifically excluded from HOA coverage due to federal environmental protection and pre-existing legal exemptions. The crowd erupted. Residents realized their president had been lying to them for months while dragging the entire community toward federal prosecution. You signed this exclusion, I said, holding up the document. You acknowledged my property's protected status, then filed fraudulent legal claims anyway. EPA Regional Director Martinez stood up and identified herself, her federal badge gleaming under fluorescent lights. This investigation involves systematic violations of federal environmental law. Mrs. Thorne, you're being served with a federal investigation notice. The room exploded into chaos. Board members demanded immediate answers. Residents shouted questions about insurance cancellation and legal liability. Channel 7's cameras captured Vivian's complete psychological collapse as federal reality destroyed her suburban fantasy. Janet Morse grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. I moved to immediately withdraw all legal action against Mr. Caldwell and remove Vivian Thorne as president for violations of federal law. The motion passed 47-3, with only Vivian and her 2 remaining allies objecting. But the final humiliation was perfectly orchestrated poetic justice. As Vivian attempted to leave through the back exit, her BMW wouldn't start, battery dead from running air conditioning during the meeting. She was forced to accept a ride home from Deputy Rodriguez, who'd arrived to serve additional federal investigation papers. Channel 7 cameras captured her walking away from the community center she'd once dominated, leaving behind a neighborhood finally free from her clipboarded tyranny. The taste of victory was sharp and clean like mountain air after a thunderstorm had cleared away all the toxic humidity. Justice served, community restored, federal law upheld. Game over. 6 months later, Brookstone Meadows had transformed from Vivian's personal dictatorship into an actual community, and my quiet retirement had become something I never expected. A second career protecting other people from HOA bullies. The immediate aftermath was swift and satisfying. Elena Rodriguez, a retired elementary school teacher who'd lived in the development for 15 years, became the new HOA president by unanimous vote. Her first official act was a public apology to me, followed by the board voting to reimburse my $3,200 in legal expenses from their emergency fund. The community newsletter published a full historical explanation of my property's protected status, complete with photographs of the original 1887 railroad deed and environmental protection documentation. Turns out, most residents were genuinely fascinated by the territorial history surrounding their neighborhood. Vivian's legal consequences were comprehensive and permanent. The EPA fined Brookstone Meadows, HOA, $75,000 for systematic attempts to violate federal environmental protection. Money that had to be raised through special community assessments that reminded everyone exactly who'd caused their legal problems. Pemberton and Associates faced a state bar malpractice investigation for filing claims without researching environmental restrictions. Their insurance company settled out of court for an undisclosed amount that probably exceeded their annual profits. Vivian herself lost her county planning commission application, faced insurance fraud charges, and was forced to sell her BMW to pay legal defense costs. Last I heard, she'd moved to a downtown apartment complex that, ironically, had no HOA whatsoever. But the positive changes extended far beyond Vivian's downfall. I began partnering with Rivers and Ridges to offer monthly environmental education tours of my protected wetland property. Families discovered the ecological treasures hidden in their own backyard, native bird species, rare plant communities, and the historical significance of territorial-era conservation efforts. The Oregon Historical Society helped establish interpretive trails highlighting railroad history and early settlement patterns. Annual federal grants now fund educational programs teaching students about environmental protection and property rights. My Property Rights Workshop series became so popular we had to move meetings to the library's main auditorium. I teach residents how to research deed histories, understand environmental protection laws, and recognize fraudulent HOA claims before they become legal problems. The program has helped 37 property owners across 3 counties successfully challenge improper HOA assessments, with documentation techniques I developed saving families thousands in legal fees. But the project I'm proudest of started with a phone call from Janet Morse 6 weeks after Vivian's resignation. "Owen," she said, "would you consider establishing some kind of legal defense fund for elderly property owners facing HOA harassment?" That conversation led to the Rural Property Defense Fund, which provides free legal consultation for isolated homeowners targeted by aggressive neighborhood associations. We've prevented 12 attempted property grabs and helped prosecute 3 cases of systematic HOA fraud. The scholarship program for environmental law students brings young lawyers to rural Oregon, learning to protect vulnerable property owners while gaining real-world experience with federal environmental enforcement. Media attention transformed my personal victory into national awareness about HOA overreach. Samantha Tatum's investigation won a state journalism award, and her documentary Neighborhood Bullies features my case as an example of successful resistance against institutional harassment. Property law schools now use Vivian's documented federal crimes as cautionary tales about researching environmental restrictions before filing boundary claims. 1 year later, my property hosted the first annual Good Neighbor Barbecue, Elena Rodriguez's idea to celebrate community cooperation over conflict. Former enemies became friends over grilled burgers and local beer, while children played near the federally protected creek that had saved my family's land. The interpretive sign at my property entrance reads, "Brookstone Buffer Zone, protected 1887, preserved forever." Below that, a smaller plaque adds, "Dedicated to all property owners who refuse to surrender their rights to neighborhood bullies." Here's what I learned that everyone dealing with HOA harassment should remember. Always research your property's historical status before accepting any association's claims. Environmental protection laws supersede local governance every single time, and federal agencies take boundary fraud seriously when properly documented.
So Owen walked away with his land, his dignity, and a federal case that's kept lawyers talking for years. But what did we really just what's happened here? This is what happened when ordinary people decide they have enough. Owen wasn't some hush-hush lawyer or political insider. He was just a guy who knew his rights and refused to be pushed around. See, bullies like Vivian's count on one thing. That's you'll be too scared, too tired, too broke to fight back. They perfected this playbook of intimidation because it usually works. Most people just pay the fine and move on. But every once in a while, someone sign up today. Someone who willing to do the homework, gather the evidence, and stand up when it matters. Owen proved that you don't need money or connection to win. You just need to be right and be patient. That creek on his property didn't just protect wetland. It protected the idea that your home is still your castle, no matter who thinks they can take it from you. How many times have you been told to just follow the rules by someone who never bothered to check if the rules were even legal? This story matters because It showed that fighting back isn't just possible. Sometimes it's necessary. What would you have done in our zoo? Let me know in the comment. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about regular people refusing to back down. Share this with anyone who needs to remember that David can still beat Goliath. Your rights don't disappear just because someone has the clipboard.